On today's show, we check in with the top 24 rookies across the NHL.
You are Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, and welcome back to Locked On NHL Prospects, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. On this show, we break down everything prospects related for you 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. I'm your host, Sebastian High, the USHL scout over at Elite Prospects. And on today's episode, we're going to be doing one big check-in on all the top rookies across the entire National Hockey League, focusing on the Calder candidates in the first segment, and then looking at the forwards, beyond the Calder candidates, obviously, in the second segment, and wrapping up the show with the defensemen and the goaltenders. There's a lot of fun prospects here. Couldn't talk about every single rookie in the league because I don't think 2 full episodes would be enough to cover every single name, but these are definitely some of the most notable ones. Players that have been scoring and also playing more than just a handful of games at the highest level here. But before we jump into the show today, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. So let's kick off the show here by starting with a Calder Trophy discussion. I think this is a reasonable place to jump into this episode with considering that these are the highlights among all the rookies in the NHL, the best of the best. And I think that 4 players really stand out above the pack so far at this point in the season. Now that we are at the 4 Nations break for the tournament that's being held in Montreal and Boston. And every other player that isn't playing there is getting a little bit of a breather. We saw Macklin Celebrini and Hutson celebrate the Boston University Beanpot victory, and the conversation for this episode really does start with those 2 players. Those are the 2 players in my eyes that are the chief contenders for the trophy this year. There are 2 others that I think definitely deserve to be in the mix, in contention, but Celebrini and Hutson have been lights out for their respective teams. Let's start off with Macklin Celebrini, the player that is not on a winning team as of yet. The San Jose Sharks are still struggling to win games in the NHL. So while he has definitely added a degree of star power and dynamism with the puck on the stick, it hasn't been enough to sway the outcomes of games so far this season. San Jose has a 15-35-7 record at the time of recording, which is good for 37 points. And 37 points is exactly kind of where they were finding themselves last year. Definitely less of a cushion now in bottom of the league compared to last season, but they are now 4 points clear of the Chicago Blackhawks, as well as 8 points clear of the Nashville Predators in terms of the tank standings, being that they are quite far in the bottom of the league with a 1-8-1 record in their last 10, but Celebrini has been doing his all to kind of inhibit that. I watched his full game against the Montreal Canadiens last week where he scored a goal, was so involved on the power play, that battle down the right side of the offensive zone between Hutson and Celebrini, the ex-teammates and now Calder rivals, was just very fun to watch. And I think it really highlighted the strengths that both these players have. Celebrini attacks with so much pace. He's so creative, but it's the intelligence and physicality and motor and just pure desire to will the puck up the ice and get it into dangerous positions that makes him just so game breaking for the San Jose Sharks. And with Hutson, he has a nonstop motor. I think that that's been one of the big reasons that he's adapted so smoothly to the NHL. The offense was never really the big question with this player of how that would look in the NHL. In my opinion, it was about the defensive game. Would his intelligence, would his habits when defending the rush, his deceptiveness, and just his aggressiveness and high motor be enough to bridge the gap between sizes? Because he is not the biggest player, but he's been really impressive defensively for the Canadiens this season, especially in terms of his rush defending, forcing play towards the outside, not giving up easy entries on his side of the ice. And in terms of in-zone defending, he's just constantly scanning, getting underneath forwards, being a real pest, and his active stick does a lot of the work there for him. And while he can still be boxed out from the slot in the defensive zone, it's been a real year of progress for Lane Hutson, and he's blossoming into one of the most dynamic defensemen in the entire NHL. So these are the two players that are in terms of Calder contenders at the forefront. They're the 2-point leaders as well. Lane Hutson has 41 points, 3 goals, 38 assists in 56 games this season for the Habs, while Macklin Celebrini has 40 points, including 17 goals in 45 for San Jose. So these are the two players scoring the goals, but they're not the only ones doing that, because Matvei Michkov is in this discussion. He's only 4 points behind Celebrini, though he has played 10 more games, which is notable. So Michkov has 16 goals and 36 points in 55 games this season for the Philadelphia Flyers. He's playing 16 minutes a night, which is definitely a bit less trust than the others are receiving. Celebrini's playing 19:42 a night as a true number one center, whereas Lane Hutson's playing 22:31 a night as a true top pairing defenseman in Montreal. But Michkov's minutes have fluctuated a little bit more. He hasn't entirely won Tortorella's trust just yet. I mean, we've seen the clips of the arguments and the benching and those storylines still happening in Philly this year, but as a whole, Michkov has been a real difference maker for the Flyers, and I know he's already completely won over the fan base in terms of just how creative he is, how intelligent he is, how much of his creation comes from right down low around the net front in the dangerous areas. There's so much to like with his offensive habits, his offensive intelligence. The puck skills, the goal scoring, the playmaking are all really, really high end, but it's the brain that really drives everything. So it's been a great season to watch Michkov so far. I mean, hasn't all been smooth, but this is a very unique player who's never going to have the smoothest of rides in terms of transitioning to the NHL. And I think as a whole, he's been doing a really brilliant job. But last but not least, a player that I think deserves to be getting more mentions than he has been outside of Calgary so far this season, and that is Dustin Wolf. One of my favorite goaltending prospects in the last 5 years, an undersized goaltender who was just dominating the WHL in this draft year, but went drafted in the 7th round despite putting up absurd numbers. I want to say he was playing 60 plus games and putting up a near 940 save percentage in the WHL. But because he's only 6 feet tall, he dropped from the draft, but the Flames are reaping the benefits of that right now. Dustin Wolf is really leading the charge in many facets on this recent resurgence for the Calgary Flames, who've been playing some pretty good hockey in recent months. I mean, 4-5-1 in the last 10 isn't the strongest, but they have 60 points in 55 games this year, which is better than I think many people expected Calgary to do this season. And Dustin Wolf, with his 912 save percentage and 19 victories in 33 starts, has been at the center of a lot of what's been going well for the Calgary Flames. He's even collected 3 assists this season, which is a fun little thing to keep an eye on. But overall, Wolf is just such an athletic and intelligent netminder, consistently well positioned, but he also has that explosive cross crease kind of transition in him to make the desperation saves. He's a player who plays his best when he's not as perceptible, but is still able to step up and make those big flashy saves when you need him to do so most. But when he's cool, composed, and collected, which he is on his best games, you know that the rest of his team can play with a lot less stress in their game, because he's such a stabilizing force back there. And I mean, he's a bit older among rookies, obviously, as a goaltender, because goaltenders need to take time to develop, but he's still just 23 years old as a 6-foot, 166-pound netminder who's been dominating the AHL in recent seasons. And I think he's more than shown that he is ready for the NHL. And his history of winning and succeeding doesn't seem to be stopping here. So it'll be fun to keep an eye on what's going on in Calgary with Dustin Wolf. But that wraps up this first segment with the Calder candidates. In the next one, we're going to be doing some quick fire on 10 forwards that are very notable in terms of their performances so far this campaign. But first, a quick message from our sponsors. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game extremely exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch three, I never feel like I missed a chance. Plus, the app is so easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's keep this episode rolling here in the second segment where we have 10 forwards to highlight. In the final segment, we're going to have 10 other players to highlight, 6 defensemen and 4 goaltenders. So let's just jump right into it because we have about 1 minute per player for the rest of the episode. Starting off with Logan Stankoven of the Dallas Stars, one of my favorite players to watch in hockey over the last 5 years at any level of play. He has 7 goals, 18 assists, and 25 points in 53 games this season. And he's just been playing his game all night, every night for the Dallas Stars. He brings so much energy, so much intensity to the equation in Dallas, and is a player that you can just rely on every single shift to leave it all on the ice. The scoring hasn't been quite the level that it was earlier on this season. I know that like less than half a point a game is perhaps a little bit lower than what the hope was for this player in Dallas this season. But remember, he's still just an NHL rookie. He's just in his second professional season. Sure, he's been succeeding at every level, but there's an adaptation period to keep in mind. And for a player that seeks out the gritty areas and wants to play through contact rather than around it, that adaptation period becomes just a little bit longer, especially as an undersized guy. But give him a little bit more time, and I have few doubts that he's going to be a perpetual 60-plus point scorer and just the exact spark plug that every single team wants to have in their lineup. Next, we have Maxim Siplikov of the New York Islanders, who has the exact same point line as Logan Stankoven, with 7 goals, 18 assists, and 25 points, but this time in 51 games. This is a defensively responsible, physical, forechecking winger. I like the way he plays the game. It's pretty simple and straightforward, but it's been really effective in his first North American season. There hasn't been all that much of an adaptation period coming from the KHL, and I think that he really has settled into his role in the New York Islanders system of being that middle six kind of presence who can chip in with some depth scoring, but mainly just brings that physicality and energy night in, night out. I've liked every viewing I've caught of him so far in the NHL. Will Smith is adapting to the NHL after a slower start. He's up to 8 goals and 15 assists for 23 points in 49 games in San Jose. The expectations, of course, were always very big with this player. The arrival of Celebrini has certainly helped mitigate that a little bit. If they hadn't drafted Celebrini, maybe the expectations for Smith this season would have been blown a little bit out of proportion. So I'm quite happy that he's in the situation that he's in at the moment, and he's able to kind of explore his playmaking game a bit more. But there's still a lot of questions for me around pace, around just that nightly engagement, and being able to play through content as well as around it. He's still adapting to the NHL. He's still figuring out how to most effectively leverage his goal scoring tools and habits. But overall, this is a player that I think is going to be a really great NHLer for a very long time. And I have few doubts he's going to adapt in the next 2-3 seasons, but it might take him a little bit of time compared to guys like Celebrini, for instance, who's both physically and mentally already at the NHL level on arrival, which just wasn't quite the case with Will Smith, but still really good adaptation over the past 2 months, especially here for the American pivot. Next, moving on, we're staying in California with an American forward, and we're going with Gauthier of the Anaheim Ducks. 9 goals, 13 assists for 22 points in 54 games. Gauthier's been allowed to just be a kind of third-line presence for Anaheim this season. He's been allowed to use his shot a little bit in second power play minutes at times, but overall is allowed to kind of settle into the lineup rather than being expected to be a top sixer out of the gate like it kind of was the expectation in San Jose with a couple of the youngsters. Anaheim's a little bit further along in that rebuild. They have pieces like Mason McTavish and Leo Carlson and so on and so forth, alongside the more veteran presences of guys like Troy Terry to fill those gaps higher in the lineup and allow Gauthier to kind of arrive in the NHL. And I think he's been playing some really good hockey there. He's physical. He's been like using that physicality quite proactively in recent viewings in the NHL as well. And I think that for a future second line power winger with a ridiculously hard shot and decent work ethic and slick hands, I think he's a really nice piece in Anaheim. Jackson Blake of the Carolina Hurricanes is such a fun, undersized, skilled player to watch. He has 11 goals, 9 assists, and 20 points in 56 games this season, and he brings a lot of pace, energy, and skill in an undersized package to the Carolina Hurricanes. He's the exact profile of player that they like selecting in the mid to late rounds, players with a lot of skill, but who drop for various reasons, oftentimes setting of where they're playing, which league, which country they're playing in, as well as things like size and that soft skill being perhaps undervalued in certain packages around the NHL. And Jackson Blake is yet another player that seems to be a really, really good find for this organization. Marco Kasper of the Detroit Red Wings has been playing in the top six and even the top line quite extensively over the past couple months. And he's been complimenting guys like Lucas Raymond and Dylan Larkin really nicely on that top line. He brings so much like ceaseless energy, and even though the scoring hasn't fully popped off just yet, I mean, 20 points in 50 games isn't jumping off the page at you, but it's certainly chipping in, and what he's bringing to the ice is opening up space for his teammates and making their lives easier, and that's something that I think fits really nicely on that top line in Detroit, and they've been winning some more games. They're kind of in the playoff picture potentially at this point, which is interesting to see for the first time in a while, and I think Marco Kasper's been playing a bigger role than he's been given credit in that rise of form. Emil Heineman of the Montreal Canadiens has been down with injury for the last little while after being hit by a car in Denver, but he has 10 goals, 7 assists, and 17 goals in 41 games for the Montreal Canadiens, playing exclusively fourth line minutes alongside Jake Evans and Yoel Armia. And he found such fantastic consistency on that line about 20 games into the season. And they became one of the better fourth lines in the NHL in that stretch, where they brought a lot of physicality, intensity, forechecking will from all the players, with also a decent level of speed, but also finishing ability. Yoel Armia, Jake Evans, and Emil Heineman are all having fantastic finishing seasons in terms of finishing chances that perhaps they weren't always being expected to, that they weren't scoring in previous years. For Heineman in the AHL, for the other two in the NHL last season, and things have just gelled really nicely. So looking forward to when he comes back from injury and rejoins the Montreal Canadiens, because he's been an important piece, and things haven't quite been clicking as smoothly ever since he went down with injury for the Habs. So he's another player that I think deserves a mention here among the rookies. We have 3 last names here, and we're just going to quick fire these because I think they are worth mentioning, even if so far this season they haven't gotten all that much of the spotlight. Yuri Kulik of the Buffalo Sabres, 11 goals, 16 points in 40 games. He's playing about third, even second line minutes on the Buffalo Sabres, and he's just been allowed to use his shot, bring energy, and play a shutdown defensive game. He fits nicely in what Buffalo has been needing this season, and I think he's going to stick around in the lineup from now until he's no longer in the organization. I think he's now a full-fledged NHLer, and he looks the part whenever I've gotten to see him. Frank Nazar has played just 26 games so far this season in the NHL and has 4 goals, 6 assists for 10 points. He's playing third line minutes, not given the biggest of opportunities alongside the Connor Bedards of the world, but he's had some nice little flashes here and there, but he's mainly just been bringing his speed and intensity in more of a depth role alongside those flashes of skill. And last but not least, Luca Del Belbalou, since his AHL call-up, has played 15 games and gotten 2 goals and 8 points for the Columbus Blue Jackets, playing a really important role on their third line, bring a real element of goal-scoring threat, soft handling in tight. That one-touch handling ability at the bumper has been really valuable for this team, and is something that they like to build around, like we've seen with Sean Monahan this season. And I think that he's been a really good fit there in Columbus. But that wraps up this second segment, a real quick fire round, and we're going to have another one of those in the final segment where we're looking at the defensemen and the goaltenders that deserve shoutouts among NHL rookies, because there are a lot among defensemen. I think a funny part is none of these defensemen, no rookie defenseman, has scored more than 10 points this season, apart from Lane Hutson, who has 41. But that wraps up this second segment, and we'll get right back into it after this message from our sponsors. You just realized that your business needed to hire somebody yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all that you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other sites. Indeed sponsored jobs put your post at the top of the page and help you reach the right candidate fast. I've been in that spot where you need the right hire like yesterday. The pressure is on, and every day without the right person is a real setback. That's exactly where Indeed sponsored jobs come in handy. They make sure that your post is seen by the right candidate right now. Now you can speed up your hiring process with a $75 sponsored job credit. Just go to Indeed.com/lockedon right now and support our show by saying that you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need. All right, let's wrap up the episode here by looking at the defensemen and the netminders, and we're going to start on the blue line here because there's a variety of players here that I think deserve mentioning. A couple of them have only played half the season in the NHL so far this campaign, but these are all players that, despite they haven't quite popped off on the score sheet just yet this season, have shown interesting flashes, and a lot of them bring a lot of value on the defensive side of the puck. Starting off with Nolan Allen of the Chicago Blackhawks. He's been a staple on the third pairing all season. He's averaging 15 minutes a night and hasn't really moved up the lineup. He has 1 goal and 7 assists for 8 points in 41 games this season. This is a guy that can play some shutdown defensive minutes. He plays with some physicality. He's not the most complex or proactive defenseman in the world, but I've seen him be a bit more aggressive in his rush defending now compared to previous seasons, which has been a nice area of progression. The NHL upside, I think, is a bit limited with this player, but he could be a third pairing guy longer term, whether that's with Chicago Blackhawks or in a different organization with a lot of talent coming through the wings in Chicago in the coming years remains to be seen, however. Next, Denton Mateychuk of the Columbus Blue Jackets has 3 points in 19 games since being called up from the AHL, where he had been leading all AHL blue liners in scoring prior to being sent up. And while he hasn't exploded in terms of production just yet, he's been really using his mobility and puck moving ability to change the flow of games for the Columbus Blue Jackets. And he's a player that is just so aggressive with a puck on his stick, but also defensively. He's proactive. He does things. He can get caught out and look bad in certain situations, certainly, but he gets involved. And when he makes a mistake, it's not for want of trying. And he's a player I respect a lot. I think he's going to bring a lot of value to the Columbus Blue Jackets organization. And he's a big reason that Adam Jiricek was an expendable piece in the eyes of the Blue Jackets brass, because this is a true blue chip prospect on the blue line. Emil Andre of the Philadelphia Flyers has played 24 games this season, and he has a goal and 6 points in that stretch. He's an undersized puck-moving defenseman with some decent handling ability. The skating is okay, but I think that the lack of physicality, the consistency with which he is boxed out from his own net front by opposing forwards has been made a bit difficult for John Tortorella to instill all the trust in the world in him. Hence, he's only seen 24 games this season, but still, he's shown some nice flashes on puck, especially this campaign. Albert Johansson of the Detroit Red Wings is a player that I've quite liked in recent seasons in watching him develop. This is a massive, pretty smooth skating defenseman who has a goal and 5 points in 34 games so far this season. I really liked his play in Sweden over the last 2 seasons, And he's a guy that uses his size, his reach really effectively to shut play down defensively. He's not someone that just gets like too passive. He likes to get involved as well, and it's a quite scary thing when a 6'6" Swedish defenseman comes roaring towards you when you're trying to get an entry on his side of the ice. I think he's been quite effective in the minutes he's gotten in Detroit this season. Along similar lines, we have Isaiah George of the New York Islanders, a player I love to watch. This is a really good skater, really, really physical, and very intelligent defenseman with very proactive stick work. He plays the game I want my bottom of the lineup defenseman to play hockey. He makes a good first pass. He keeps the puck moving. He keeps his feet moving. He's decent on retrievals, but what he does best it is prevent entries and clear the net front. Does a lot of that dirty, grimy work that you want your big defenseman to do, and he does it very effectively. And 5 points in 33 games. He's not an offensive defenseman by any stretch of the imagination, but he's been playing a role consistently for the Islanders, and there's a reason that he's just stuck in the lineup ever since he got called up when injuries arose. Finally, to wrap up the defenseman, we have Owen Pickering of the Pittsburgh Penguins, who has 3 points in 25 games this season. Another pretty big left shot defenseman. This is a guy who grew massively in his draft year and has taken a bit of time to kind of grow into that frame and get used to it, feel comfortable within his size, in his body, but he's getting there, and he's starting to move with a lot more fluidity. And this is also a player with some real defensive upside in terms of stick work against the rush, matching footwork, just snuffing play into the boards, killing plays in transition. He shepherds play towards the outside. He clears the middle lane and the slot quite effectively. There's a lot to like with this player, and there's a reason he's been getting minutes with the Pittsburgh Penguins already this season. Now we have the goaltenders to wrap up the show, and a real quick fire round here. Interesting to note, Justus Annunen, who struggled for a while in the Colorado Avalanche system, has been really quite solid in Nashville since being traded there, having a 7-3 record and a .904 save percentage. The first time he's been over 900 in the NHL in any capacity so far in his career. In Ottawa, Leevi Merilainen's played pretty well in relief of Linus Ullmark. He's had a 925 save percentage this season and an 8-3 record. He's been playing especially a lot in the last 2 months. And he's been a really explosive and athletic goaltender. I watched him a lot in his final junior year in Kingston when he was playing with Shane Wright. I watched a lot of live games of the Kingston Frontenacs that year, and he's grown his game a lot since then. He was quite panicky at the time. He's become a lot more controlled, a lot more cerebral of a netminder rather than reactionary, which has been really nice to see for his development. Then we have Jakub Dobeš of the Montreal Canadiens, who, after an electric 5-0 start to his career, has come back down to earth a little bit. He's a 5-2-1 record in the NHL with a .908 save percentage. He's had some fantastic displays. He's also been pulled now at this point after he had a pretty difficult performance a couple days ago with the Habs, where Simon Montembeault came back in and really stabilized things for the Canadiens. But still, despite the growing pains, this is a netminder with some upside. I think that this is a guy that could be a 1A, 1B kind of player at his peak, but I don't think that he is the top goaltending prospect in the Canadian system because that honor goes to Jacob Fowler. And finally, the last player of the episode from the San Jose Sharks and the San Jose Barracuda, Yaroslav Askarov, who has struggled a little bit in the NHL so far this season, to no surprises because he's playing in San Jose. He has a 4-6-3 record and an .896 save percentage in the NHL this season. He's getting acclimated, but he's been dominant in the AHL. He's certainly getting more minutes. He's getting some more reps, and he's warming up. I'm curious to see where he kind of lands at the end of the season, if he was able to find some real consistency at the NHL level. I'd love to see it, but we shall see. He's still a very young goaltender, and goaltenders take time. Goalies are voodoo, as we all say, but he's a good goalie. He's going to be a good one for a very long time in San Jose, and it hasn't happened just yet this season, but he's going to take over that crease at some point. But that wraps up today's episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you're listening on your favorite podcasting platform, please make sure to make us your first listen of the day. We always really appreciate our everydayers. And for your second listen of the day, you can head on over to Locked On Fantasy Hockey, where Flip and Steel break down everything in the fantasy world going on, and where you can learn how to build not only the most competitive, but the most sustainable fantasy lineup to hit your fantasy hockey dreams. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you want to hear from the podcast moving forward. And any questions that you might have, it might just be thrown into our mailbag episode later on this week. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm your host, Sebastian High, and I hope to catch you listening again very, very soon.